everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we are going to be looking at something a little different.
Oh,
Yeah, we're actually tackling two films instead of just one.
ooh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, so we're diving into Imitation of Life.
Okay.
But get this, we've got two adaptations of the same novel.
Oh, wow.
One from 1934
Okay,
and one from 1959.
interesting.
And as you can imagine, they tackle a lot of the same themes,
Mhm.
but through totally different lenses.
Of course, yeah.
So we've got race, identity, motherhood.
All the big ones.
Yeah, but it's really fascinating to see how those themes are explored differently depending on, when the film was made.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's
Yeah.
it's going to be really interesting to kind of unpack how those different social and cultural contexts shape the way these stories were told.
Totally. So to kind of set the stage for those who haven't seen the films,
Okay.
both of them tell the story of two single mothers,
Right.
one white and one black,
Okay.
who become friends and business partners. And their daughters grow up together but have very, very different experiences.
Yeah, and that's where I think the title Imitation of Life really comes into play. You see these characters, particularly the daughters, grappling with societal expectations and trying to figure out where they fit in a world that doesn't always accept them for who they truly are.
Yeah. Let's start with that 1934 film
Okay.
made during the Depression, right? And the thing that really struck me was how the black character Delilah is portrayed.
Interesting.
She's not just a maid or a servant like you might expect from a film of that era.
Yeah, right.
She's a savvy businesswoman who actively contributes to the white character Bee's success.
That is interesting, especially considering the time period. It makes you wonder if that portrayal was reflecting the spirit of collaboration and shared struggle that defined the Depression era. There's a scene where Bee is really struggling to make ends meet, and Delilah actually suggests that they combine her pancake recipe with Bee's marketing skills to start a business together. That sense of partnership, of two women supporting each other to achieve a common goal. It feels very much in tune with the social and economic realities of that time.
You wouldn't necessarily expect that kind of representation from 1930s Hollywood, but there it is.
Exactly.
But then fast forward to 1959,
Yeah.
and the social landscape has totally shifted. Cold War anxieties about communism,
Mhm.
the civil rights movement is starting to gain traction.
And you see those anxieties kind of reflected in the portrayal of Annie the Black character in the 1959 film.
Yeah.
She's more of a traditional domestic worker reliant on Laura the white character for employment.
Right.
It's not necessarily a regressive portrayal, I don't think, but it definitely reflects a different social and economic reality for many black women at the time.
It makes you think, doesn't it? Like, did audiences in 1959 need to see that kind of dynamic to connect with the story, or was it more about Hollywood's reluctance to portray true racial equality on screen?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it speaks to the power of film to both reflect and shape societal norms.
Totally.
Hmm.
Now, one thing that both films really dig into is this theme of passing,
Right.
where the light-skinned daughters wrestle with their racial identity and the pressure to conform to white norms.
And it's fascinating how each film handles that theme so differently.
Yeah.
The 1934 film touches upon it with Peola Delilah's daughter, but the 1959 film with Sarah Jane
Right.
really dives deep into her internal struggle and the lengths she goes to fit into a white world. It's pretty gut-wrenching to watch.
It is. And the 1959 film definitely doesn't shy away from showing the ugly side of racism either.
Right.
Like the scene where Sarah Jane is harassed and physically threatened when her white friends discover her true identity.
It's a really powerful and disturbing scene, and it speaks volumes about how the conversation around race had evolved in those intervening decades.
Definitely. By the late 1950s, with the civil rights movement in full swing, audiences were perhaps more ready to confront those harsh realities on screen.
I think you're right. There was a growing awareness of the systemic nature of racism and the need for social change.
So we've got these two films, both grappling with race and identity, but using different storytelling techniques and reflecting the social anxieties of their times.
Yeah, and it's already so interesting to see how these seemingly simple stories about mothers and daughters can hold up a mirror to American society.
It is. And there's so much more to unpack. What's fascinating, too, is how the casting choices in each film reflect shifting views on race and representation in Hollywood.
Oh, absolutely.
Like in the 1934 film, Peola is played by Freddie Washington, a light-skinned black actress.
Yeah.
But in the 1959 film, they cast Susan Conner, an actress of mixed Latina and white heritage, as Sarah Jane. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a complex issue and one that deserves its own deep dive, honestly. But at a glance, it speaks to these evolving understandings of racial categories and who gets to represent whom on screen.
Right.
In the 1930s, casting a light-skinned black actress might have been considered progressive,
Yeah.
whereas by the 1950s, a mixed-race actress could perhaps more easily pass as black for the audience.
It's almost like those casting choices unintentionally reveal the limitations of Hollywood's approach to race and representation, even as they're trying to tell a story about racial identity.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this deep dive so compelling.
Yeah.
We're not just analyzing two films. We're looking at how they reflect broader societal shifts and force us to confront some uncomfortable truths about representation and storytelling.
And how much those societal shifts impacted the way these stories were told, even though they're based on the same source material.
Exactly.
It's mind-blowing how much these films reveal, even unintentionally, about how America viewed race and identity in different eras.
Absolutely. And we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, we have.
There's so much more to explore in terms of the specific choices each film made and how those choices reflect the social and cinematic landscapes of their times.
I'm excited to dive in.
Me too.
Mm-hmm.
Stay with us because in part 2, we'll dig even deeper into these films and uncover even more about how these seemingly simple stories about mothers and daughters can hold up a mirror to American society and force us to confront some difficult but important questions.
I'm ready. Welcome back to our deep dive into Imitation of Life.
Yes.
Welcome back. We've just kind of scratched the surface of these two fascinating films.
Yeah.
But now I really want to dig a little deeper
Yeah.
into some of the choices each film made.
Yeah.
Because those choices speak volumes about the social and cinematic landscapes of their time, right?
Absolutely.
One area where we see a really striking contrast, I think,
Yeah.
is in how each film portrays the ambitions
Okay.
of the white mothers.
Okay.
Bee in the 1934 film and Laura in the 1959 film.
Interesting.
Now, you know I love a good ambition story.
Of course. Yeah.
And Bee's journey in the 1934 film
Yeah.
is definitely one for the books.
Okay.
She starts out wanting to be an actress,
Uh-huh.
which wasn't exactly encouraged for women in the 1930s.
No, not at all.
But then she kind of finds her calling in entrepreneurship.
And it's not just that she becomes a successful businesswoman.
Right.
It's how the film portrays her ambition.
Yeah.
Remember that scene where she's pitching her pancake business to those skeptical investors?
Oh, yeah.
She's so confident, she's articulate, she's completely in her element.
Yeah, she's killing it.
Yeah, it's almost like the film is saying, hey, it's okay for women to have ambitions even in tough times.
Exactly. But then you've got Laura in the 1959 film,
Right.
and her ambition is a whole different beast.
It is interesting how it's portrayed much differently.
Yeah. It's almost like it consumes her.
Yeah.
Not always in a good way. I mean, she literally leaves her daughter with Annie so she can pursue her acting career in New York.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's interesting how Laura's ambition is presented with a lot more moral ambiguity.
Yes.
Like she's willing to make sacrifices, even hurtful ones, in the pursuit of her dreams.
Yeah.
And that complexity makes her character so much more fascinating, don't you think?
I agree, totally. It makes you wonder if the filmmakers were intentionally reflecting those changing social dynamics of the 1950s.
Possibly.
Where women's ambition was becoming more acceptable.
Yeah.
But was still often seen as a threat to the traditional family structure.
Right.
So it's like, can women have it all?
Right.
And at what cost?
Exactly. It's a question that still resonates today, which is, I think, what makes these films so enduring.
Totally. Okay, so we've talked about ambition.
Uh-huh.
Now let's switch gears and talk about money.
Okay.
Because the economic relationships between the white and black characters in these films are also pretty telling.
Oh, absolutely. In the 1934 film, Delilah isn't just working for Bee.
Yeah.
She's a true partner in the business.
Yeah.
They're sharing profits, making decisions together.
Right.
And there's this sense of mutual respect and collaboration that feels, dare I say, almost radical for a film made during segregation.
For sure. And it's not like they shy away from showing the power dynamics at play because of race. But there's this underlying message of economic empowerment.
Yeah.
For both women.
Yeah.
They're both single mothers, they're both striving for a better life, and they're doing it together.
It's almost like the film is suggesting that economic collaboration can be a bridge between racial divides.
Totally.
Which is a pretty powerful message for the 1930s.
It is. But then you have the 1959 film.
Yeah.
And the economic relationship between Annie and Laura is much more traditional.
Much more, yeah.
More like employer-employee.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Annie is Laura's housekeeper.
Right.
And while there's genuine affection between them,
Oh, yeah.
it's clear that Laura holds the power in that relationship.
Definitely. And I think that shift might reflect the realities of limited economic opportunities for many Black women during that period.
Yeah.
Even as the civil rights movement was gaining momentum, it's kind of a reminder that progress isn't always linear
Yeah.
and that economic disparities can persist even amidst social change.
It's a bit sobering.
Yeah.
Makes you realize that we're still grappling with many of the same issues today.
Oh, absolutely.
Now let's dive into something that both films handle beautifully,
Okay.
and that's the mother-daughter relationships.
Oh, those are the heart of it all, aren't they?
Oh, talk about emotional roller coasters.
Seriously. These relationships are so complex and layered.
Yeah.
You've got the love, the resentment, the misunderstanding, a longing for acceptance, and ultimately a deep sense of loss. It's almost Shakespearean.
It's funny you should say that because the scene in the 1959 film where Annie confronts Sarah Jane at the nightclub
Oh, yeah.
is pure melodrama in the best possible way.
It's so good.
The lighting, the music, Juanita Moore's performance,
Oh, yeah.
it's all so intense.
And what makes that scene so powerful is that it's not just about a mother's heartbreak over her daughter's rejection.
Right.
It's about the systemic forces that have driven them apart.
Right.
Sarah Jean's desperation to pass as white, her fear of being rejected by society,
Yeah.
it all comes pouring out in that moment. It's just devastating.
It is. And while the 1934 film doesn't go quite as deep into the emotional turmoil,
Yeah,
Peela's rejection of Delilah is still heartbreaking.
for sure.
You can just see Delilah's pain, her confusion, her inability to understand why her daughter would want to deny a part of herself.
It's so powerful and really underscores that universal longing for acceptance and belonging,
Yeah.
and how societal pressures can warp even the closest of bonds.
Totally. And it's a reminder that the scars of racism can ripple through generations,
Absolutely.
leaving wounds that are really difficult to heal.
They are. It's a lot to unpack, but it's what makes these films so compelling.
It is. They're not just entertainment. They're reflections on human nature,
Yeah.
on the complexities of identity,
Yeah,
and on the struggles we all face in trying to find our place in the world.
for sure. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the cinematic techniques each film uses to tell this story.
Okay, so the 1934 film is, of course, in black and white,
Right.
which gives it that classic, almost timeless feel. But it also limits the ways in which racial differences can be visually represented.
Exactly. And that's where the 1959 film's use of Technicolor is so striking.
Yes.
It's not just that the colors are beautiful, it's that they're used intentionally to highlight the contrast between the characters' skin tones.
I was going to bring that up, like that scene at the beach where Sarah Jane is sunbathing with her white friends,
Oh, yeah.
and the camera just lingers on their contrasting skin tones.
Yes.
It's almost like a visual representation of the racial divide that Sarah Jane is trying to cross.
It's brilliant filmmaking. It speaks to director Douglas Sirk's masterful use of color to underscore the film's themes.
Yeah.
Technicolor was still relatively new in the 1950s, and Sirk wasn't afraid to use it in a way that was both aesthetically pleasing
Yeah.
and thematically resonant.
And speaking of Sirk, his use of melodrama in the 1959 film is
Okay.
something I wanted to touch on.
Okay.
Because it's such a defining characteristic of his style.
It is.
Those heightened emotions, the dramatic music, the way he frames certain shots.
Yeah.
It's all very deliberate.
It's all intentional. Absolutely. Critics initially dismissed his films as being too over the top,
Yeah, I can see that.
but now his use of melodrama is seen as a way of amplifying the emotional stakes of the story
Yeah.
and forcing audiences to confront uncomfortable truths.
Yeah.
He's not trying to be subtle. He wants to shake you to your core.
And it works. It makes the story feel so much more visceral and immediate.
Exactly. You can't help but get swept up in the drama of it all.
And that's what makes Sirk such a fascinating filmmaker.
Absolutely.
He takes a seemingly simple story about mothers and daughters,
Yeah.
and he turns it into this grand operatic exploration of race,
Yes.
identity, and societal hypocrisy.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to American society and saying, this is who we are.
Yeah.
This is what we're capable of. Now what are you going to do about it?
Exactly. And that's the power of art, isn't it? It can
Yeah.
challenge us,
Yeah.
provoke us,
For sure.
and ultimately inspire us to be better.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about ambition. We've talked about race, motherhood cinematic techniques.
Even a bit of social commentary.
A bit? Yeah,
It feels like we've covered a lot of ground.
we have. And it's a testament to the richness of these films that
Mhm.
we could spend hours unpacking their layers and nuances.
Yeah.
But there's one element we haven't touched on yet,
Oh.
and it might surprise you.
I mean, I'm intrigued. What is this final twist you've got up your sleeve?
Well, it involves taking a closer look at the source material itself,
Okay.
Fannie Hurst's novel,
Okay.
and how its own complexities and even contradictions
Okay.
influenced both film adaptations.
You're telling me there's even more to uncover.
Oh, there's always more to uncover.
I'm hooked.
Stay tuned, because in our final part, we're going to explore how the novel's portrayal of race and identity shaped and perhaps even limited the stories that these two films were able to tell.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Imitation of Life.
Yes, we are.
And as promised,
As promised.
we are finally getting into the source material.
Yes.
Fannie Hurst's novel.
Fannie Hurst's novel.
Also titled Imitation of Life.
That's right.
And I have to confess,
Okay.
I haven't read it.
You haven't.
Not yet, but I'm ready to have my mind blown.
Well, I think you're in for a treat, because the novel adds a whole new layer to this conversation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It was written in the 1930s.
Right.
And while it tackles a lot of the same themes, it does so through a lens that really reflects those social and racial biases of the time.
So even though the 1934 film is considered to be, more progressive in some ways, it's still drawing from a source material that might not be as enlightened as we'd like to think.
That's exactly right. And that's what makes this so fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Both films, despite their differences, made choices about what to adapt and what to leave out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Choices that I think reveal a lot about how filmmakers were navigating these issues of race and representation in their respective eras.
Give me an example.
Okay, well, for starters,
Yeah.
Delilah's character in the novel is much more subservient and way less of a business partner than she is in the 1934 film.
Interesting.
In the book, her role is more aligned with that stereotypical mammy figure that was so common in literature and film at that time.
Okay.
So the filmmakers, I think, clearly made a conscious decision to give her more agency and a stronger voice.
It's like they were trying to push the boundaries a little bit of what was considered acceptable to portray on screen in the 1930s.
Right.
Even if they were still, working within the constraints of the source material.
Absolutely. And then you had the 1959 film, which is often praised for its boldness in tackling those racial tensions head on.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is that it actually downplays certain aspects of the novel.
Oh, really?
That might have been considered too controversial for 1950s audiences.
Like what?
Okay, so in the novel, there's a subplot involving a romantic relationship between a white man and a light-skinned black woman who is passing as white. And this subplot is completely absent from the 1959 film.
Wow. Yeah, I can see why they might have avoided that storyline.
Yeah.
I mean, interracial relationships were still very much taboo in mainstream Hollywood films at that time.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So even though the 1959 film is considered to be, progressive for its time, it was still operating within certain limitations.
It's like a reminder that even the most groundbreaking films are products of their time,
For sure.
shaped by those social norms and expectations.
Absolutely. And it's why I think it's so important to engage with these films critically, to understand the choices that were made and to consider the perspectives that might have been left out or silenced.
That's a really good point. So where does that leave us?
Right.
Like, how should we approach these two films?
Yeah.
Knowing that they're both influenced by the novel's limitations and the filmmaker's own choices.
I think it's about appreciating them as these snapshots of how American society grappled with these issues of race, identity, and social change at different moments in history.
Right.
They're not perfect reflections of reality.
Of course.
But they offer, I think, really valuable insights into that evolving cultural landscape.
And they spark these important conversations about race and privilege and the complexities of human relationships, conversations that are still so relevant today.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of art, isn't it? It challenges our assumptions, makes us uncomfortable,
sometimes,
and ultimately helps us to see the world through these different lenses.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Imitation of Life, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will walk away with?
I think it's this. The stories we tell and how we tell them matter.
Yeah.
Whether it's a novel from the 1930s or a film from the 1950s, these narratives shape our understanding of the world and have this power to influence how we see ourselves and how we see others.
And sometimes the most thought-provoking stories are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers.
Absolutely.
They make us want to keep exploring these complex issues long after the credits have rolled.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And that's what we hope this deep dive has done for you.
Yeah.
Sparked your curiosity, challenged some of your assumptions, and maybe even inspired you to seek out these films in the novel
Yeah.
and draw your own conclusions.
Because at the end of the day, the most rewarding deep dives
Yes.
are the ones that lead to more questions,
Yes.
more conversations,
For sure.
and a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
I love it. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thanks to all of you for listening. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.